from Idaho News 6. We're so glad you could be with us this morning because we have a lot of education news to get to. And joining me for Making the Grade, as he always does on these Tuesday mornings, Kevin Richard from Idaho Education News. Kevin, I'm shocked by the amount of news in education we have, but of course, all of it now being tied directly to coronavirus, most of it that we're going to be talking about, and how the phases of reopening are going, and for that matter, what the economy is doing. So let's get started, and we invite everybody out in the public to give us their comments, their questions, their thoughts as we talk through a number of these topics. But we have to start with Ada County announcing yesterday from Central District Health that they are going to be moving back to phase 3 as of basically midnight tonight. And why did this happen? I know that this has ties to our economy, obviously. It has ties to the numbers that are coming in from Central District Health, and it has ties to education. So how would you like to start, my friend?
Well, I think you have to start with the math here. And while I think this announcement from Central District Health may have caught some people off guard, I don't know if it really should have. I've been tracking the numbers, and we track the numbers with an eye towards how this might affect education now and into the future. The simple fact is, by the math, Ada County's coronavirus case numbers increased by 25% last week. That's a really big spike in cases, and it's continued really through the weekend. Based on Health and Welfare's numbers, you had another 19% increase from Friday to Monday. Central District Health reported some slightly different numbers and some lower numbers, but any way you slice it, numbers have been increasing in Ada County significantly. And health officials are concerned that it's not just that the numbers are increasing right now, it's that the contagious rate, the infectious rate, for some reason in Ada County is extremely high. What Dr. Ted Epperly was talking about during the press conference on Monday was that for every one person infected, you have the potential that they can infect 7 people. That's an extremely high infection rate relative to other viruses. So you can't really be too surprised when you look at the math that Central District Health stepped in and set these new standards, these new rules for Ada County.
And right here on Making the Grade, where we discuss education, this is where we have to start, Kevin, because fact of the matter is that where these numbers stand right now, people were wondering if we were going to see a spike come fall and what that would do for kids going to school in the fall and the reopening plan. There's a spike at least happening in Ada County right now, and we're only in the middle of June. Let's talk a little bit about schools reopening in the fall, if that will happen, what it's looking like, and the fact that the governor has put together a new committee to try and make sure that kids can go back to school.
Right. So I think what you're seeing with Central District Health and the closures of large gatherings and bars in Ada County, to me, it feels like a foreshadow of what we may see come fall as school officials have to make decisions about opening school, keeping school open, potentially closing schools in the event of an uptick in cases. Because you're right, what the governor and the State Board of Education are doing right now is putting that decision in the hands of local educators. The State Board is going to put together some guidelines, and they're going to work fairly quickly. This reopening committee held its first meeting on Monday. They hope to have recommendations finalized by next week, and they hope to get them to local school officials right after the 4th of July so that school officials can start to think about what does school look like in the fall? What could school look like in the fall? What would be the guidelines to try to reopen?
We should mention, though, that these are non-binding guidelines, correct? I want to go back to what you said about local control. Everybody all the way along, and as we're seeing now with Ada County having to move back to phase 3, this is going to be a local control issue because it's going to have to be, correct?
It's by design going to be a local control issue. So there's not going to be a statewide policy in terms of opening schools or keeping schools open or closing schools. Right now, the state is really trying to leave that decision in the hands of local officials. So, I think what we're seeing unfolding right now in the summer is pretty much a good indication of what we can come to expect in the fall.
Well, and let's talk about the fact that Boise State yesterday, on top of what Central District Health said, announced that it is closing its campus starting this morning for the next week until June 28th because they have 8 positive or possibly positive, presumed positive cases of COVID-19 associated with the campus. So Boise State is officially closed again as of this morning.
Right. And their hope is to use this as a chance to clean the facilities, do some contact tracing with people who may have been in contact with these 8 individuals who've tested positive. It's all with a view towards still trying to reopen the campus on August 24th. But again, let's talk a little bit about that, how these are going to be local decisions, how there are going to be, local circumstances that affect what's going to happen. We've already talked about what's happening in Ada County. We've already talked about the uptick in cases countywide, the 8 cases that have been traced to Boise State just in the past 48 hours. Compare it to Latah County, the home of the University of Idaho. They are still in single digits in Latah County in terms of positive coronavirus cases. Now, what happens between now and August, what happens after August in Latah County, in Ada County, all remains to be seen. But pretty clearly a very different picture in terms of the coronavirus outbreak in Latah County near U of I, as opposed to Ada County, right near the Boise State campus.
And Kevin Richard is joining us right here on Making the Grade live on Facebook saying, do you see any other counties moving back to stage 3? And at this point, of course, Central District Health, which is responsible for a few counties, has said, no, this is only in Ada County. But it goes directly to what you're saying about local control of schools, which is that it's all going to depend on the numbers. And what the universities have to do at this point is going to be up to the universities to decide, because here in Idaho, the good news is they're all in different counties. Right.
And I don't think it's for me to predict whether other counties are going to go to stage 3 or not. I don't feel like I'm I don't feel like I'm a health expert or a public health expert, so I don't think it's my place to make a prediction. But one thing that did jump out at me regarding that question, we talked about what's happened in Ada County in the past 3 days, from Friday to Monday. When I crunched the numbers and wrote my blog on Monday night, 19% increase in case numbers in Ada County over the past 3 days. Canyon County, right across the county line, has experienced a 17% increase in cases over the past 3 days. There's an uptick going on in Canyon County. What's the difference? Well, Canyon County is part of a different health district. And that health district has, as of right now, taken no actions regarding coronavirus spread and moving off of stage 4. So, that doesn't really answer your question, but it does kind of provide a backdrop, because as we've tracked the numbers and as I crunch the numbers and as I write about the numbers, I'm always looking at, what's the trend? County to county, looking at some of these larger counties that have had more cases, what's been the statewide trend, what's been the trend in terms of fatalities, hospitalizations, number of patients considered to be recovered, just to try to compare these numbers and to try to give people as much information and as much of a sweep of the data as possible.
If you're just joining us, this is Making the Grade live on Facebook. Kevin Richard from Idaho Education News joining me on Tuesday mornings at 11 a.m. in our new virtual studios, as we've been doing for a while. We'd love to take your comments and questions. Before I leave the subject of the Public Schools Reopening Committee that we've been talking about, Kevin, the head of that committee is also the head of the State Board of Education, and that's Debbie Critchfield. And she gave some numbers to Idaho News 6, which reflect numbers we've been talking about here before about what parents feel about the fall. And of course, these numbers that she's repeating came before the spike in Ada County. And what we've said is that 75 to 80% of parents, grandparents, would like to see their kids go back to school. 3% have actually said that they liked the virtual learning model and will continue with some form of that. 20%-ish still seem to be quite unsure of what they're going to do in the fall. So I guess my question is not necessarily to you, Kevin, but to all of you watching. And I want to know, is this quick spike that we're seeing and the change back to phase 3 already in June changing your mind as a guardian, as a parent, as a grandparent of what's going to happen in the fall? And Kevin, it has to change the minds of the school districts. They must be looking at this and saying, okay, we've got to make sure our plans are in place to be able to move back and forth between phases.
It's a twofold challenge, I think, for the schools. It's a challenge not just to figure out an educational model that works, a learning model that works. It's also, I think it's a challenge of trying to come to a place where parents and guardians feel comfortable about the decisions they're going to make. I mean, think about every decision we make as consumers, every decision we make as far as going through our daily lives is being viewed through this prism of the pandemic. You know, every personal decision we make is tougher. And I'm speaking as somebody, my kids have grown up. My kids are adults. So they're making their own decisions. I can't imagine what parents are going through as they make those decisions and think about those decisions that they're going to have to make this fall when it regards the health of their kids, and the education that their kids are going to receive. What a difficult decision that all parents and all guardians are going to have to make. So I think for schools, it's coming up with a place where parents and guardians can feel the most comfortable about the decisions that they make in terms of keeping their children healthy, keeping their loved ones healthy, but also trying to make sure that they have access to a quality education. It's a very difficult situation all around. We know that, but what we've seen in the past couple of days just reminds you of how difficult this process is going to be.
And again, how it is going to be localized, because here again, La Familia Robles says, yes, I live in Canyon County. At least they feel that the health department needs to wake up their thoughts and get things shut down so the virus doesn't get out of control. And it is going to depend county by county how this happens, and therefore school district by school district, because what might happen to the state's largest school district, West Ada, may not necessarily be the case for Nampa schools or the Caldwell School District, even though there are larger school districts in and of themselves. This fall, we may have some kids online in one county and some kids not in another.
And take it back to the decision that Central District Health made on Monday. Now, this is a decision that doesn't affect education immediately or necessarily, but it gives you an idea of how Central District Health approached the issue from a commercial standpoint. Ada County, uptick in cases, closure of bars, closure of large gatherings. Compared to the other 3 counties in that health district, Boise County is still one of a handful of counties in the state that have no positive cases, no reported cases of coronavirus. Valley County has, I believe, 3 at this point. Elmore County has a higher number, but Elmore County has a little bit larger population than Boise or Valley counties. But relatively speaking, Elmore County's numbers and Elmore County's increase in numbers hasn't been nearly what we're seeing of late in Ada County. So that's one health district with 4 very different counties and 4 different stages in this process.
Kevin, let me bring in a few more comments from parents that I'm seeing here, because as you were saying, this is an unprecedented time, as we've said since March. But Adriana says, I have a new kindergartner. Oh goodness, going off to school, and she really needs to be there in person. I get that. But she also is saying, I understand safety first. And then there's
and we've talked about, I'm just going to interject, that's something we've talked about in-house, that we really want to look at the kindergarten registration numbers, because I think they're going to be a real indication of where parents are in this process, where guardians are in this process, what enrollment might look like. So kindergarten registration is something we're going to be watching very closely. Watch our website. We'll have coverage on that.
I'm going to be curious about that as well. Tina, I wanted to bring this up. You know, she's wondering here, as you read it, that, you know, should as a parent, do you start your kids off digitally so there's no change, you know, because this is a mental aspect for these children too, for whether or not they can even understand what it's like, depending on their age, to go from one environment back to another environment. Let's face it, it is difficult enough as adults to be doing all of this in a new way and to try and guide that. So just a few thoughts on what parents are thinking as they're joining us here on Making the Grade. And it's understandable. I get it as a parent, and I can just interject really fast. When we moved back to phase 3 yesterday, my son is in high school and he plays basketball. And all of a sudden, we had to move back a phase in basketball because he no longer can have any kind of contact with the basketball team. So it is affecting children even during the summer too, Kevin.
Definitely, for sure.
All right, we're going to continue to take your comments, your questions, your thoughts about all of this, because fact of the matter is that probably the hottest topic of the summer that we're going to be covering here on Making the Grade is whether or not schools will reopen in the fall, how they will reopen, what the plan is for everybody. And yes, that includes daycares as well. But I want to get to actually a couple other big pieces of news, but one specifically from yesterday that we've been following here on Making the Grade. Kevin, the Supreme Court ruled on State Superintendent Sherri Ybarra's lawsuit. Now, to bring people up to speed, this is a lawsuit she filed against the State Board of Education and the legislature to try and keep IT jobs and almost $3 million in her department after the legislature at the very end of the session decided to move those positions, 18 of them, to the State Board of Education's control. The decision came down yesterday and it was a unanimous ruling.
Yeah, a very clear victory for the legislature, a very clear setback for State Superintendent Sherri Ybarra. The Supreme Court ruling unanimously that the legislature acted constitutionally, acted within its purview when it decided to move these 18 positions and this $2.7 million out of Ybarra's State Department of Education and under the umbrella of the State Board of Education, a separate entity. Of course, Superintendent Ybarra is a member of the state board, but it is a separate entity. It's a separate jurisdiction. That's why Ybarra was fighting for this funding and fighting this transfer really from the final days of the legislative session through this legal challenge. Basically, the court came down to saying this is an issue that this may have been a new dimension of the debate, but this is a debate that's been going on for 130 years, and that in essence, the state constitution clearly makes the state board the state's education policy making body. So as a result, the idea of transferring dollars from the State Department of Education to the State Board of Education was constitutional.
So does this weaken the position of the state superintendent?
It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays itself out because, Superintendent Ybarra has made this into a fairly personal battle. She has suggested that there are legislators who want to get rid of the elected position entirely or want to dismantle her department piece by piece by moving dollars and employees and power away from her department and moving it under the umbrella of the state board. There's nothing in that ruling that would stop the legislature from doing that again. If legislators desire to move positions and move dollars away from the State Department of Education, they're certainly emboldened by this decision from the Supreme Court. I mean, it's a green light from the state board, from the state Supreme Court, I should say, a green light to do this again in the future if legislators decide that that's what they think is sound policy. So I think it puts Ybarra in a weak positions in power. But what I think is maybe even more important and maybe more significant and more worth watching in 2021 is what's the working relationship like between Ybarra and the legislature? Because Ybarra really went all in on this lawsuit, not just trying to keep positions and not just trying to keep $2.7 million under her watch, but she really turned this into a personal battle between herself and fellow Republicans in the legislature. So I will be curious to see what that working relationship is like. I'll be curious to see if there is any sign of any kind of residual tension between the bodies. So, I don't think we've heard the last on this legal issue. The Supreme Court was loud and clear on the constitutional question. The political questions will be a lot more interesting to try to decode as we move forward.
As they always are, right?
As always, yes.
We should mention, though, Kevin, as Idaho Education News did so well, that you did point out the fact that Superintendent Ybarra did vote again with the entire state board to push through a budget. And this was before the ruling came out. This was last week.
Right.
She decided to vote for the budget that removed the positions and the money from her office that she was in a lawsuit over. I found that curious when you all wrote about that.
And I still do find it curious. So it was a procedural vote at a state board meeting earlier this month. The state board voted unanimously to endorse several budgets, including the state board's own operating budget, but also the college and university budget, career technical education, Idaho Public Television, a whole menu of agency budgets that are under the state board's jurisdiction. But yes, she voted in favor of the state board budget, which included this $2.7 million shift that was the crux of the lawsuit. So I'm not really sure why she did that. And we've never really gotten an explanation from Ybarra's office as to what happened here. We asked for comment, 6 days ago, and we haven't gotten any kind of explanation or any kind of response from Ybarra or from her department.
Well, let's transfer over to another hot topic, which is the transgender athletics ban. Again, something that passed the legislature this past session, was signed into law by the governor. This law now hitting the Trump administration, with the Attorney General, William Barr, actually making a note of the new Idaho law. Can you tell us what happened with this?
The Trump administration weighed in on Friday with a court document supporting the transgender athletics ban, the law that will go into effect now July 1st. And as you mentioned, William Barr, the Attorney General, quoted in a news release saying that that this is an appropriate law, that this is something that the Trump administration supports. It just elevates the debate over this law, and it's a continuing debate. It's not just what we saw on Friday with the Trump administration weighing in. We saw development on Monday, question of whether the state of California is going to allow publicly funded travel to the state of Idaho. And Alana Rubel, the House Minority Leader and opponent of this law, she has a guest opinion that we've posted at idahoednews.org, talking about that and talking about the implications of these laws that were passed earlier this session. Because House Bill 500, the transgender athletics ban, is one of a couple of bills that are going into law that address transgender rights. Probably, really, when you get down to it, probably the most controversial aspect of the 2020 session. Probably some of the most controversial action that the legislature took, and that controversy clearly continuing months after the votes, months after these laws were signed.
Well, we should mention that there is a lawsuit. That lawsuit came just days after it was signed into law. And
exactly.
That's where
the Trump administration weighed in, supporting Idaho's position in that lawsuit. So yes, we'll have to watch and see what happens with that lawsuit. That's going to be an ongoing legal dispute.
Well, and this is a first in the nation, correct? So, I mean, there is the potential that this could make its way to the Supreme Court, correct?
Theoretically, I mean, it could be a test case on this larger issue. So, we'll see how far it goes.
If you'd like to read more, of course, about all of these stories, you can go to idahoednews.org. We've also posted many stories. In fact, if you'd like to read more about what California has said about restricting its state funds travel funds from coming to Idaho, and that's not just Idaho, the state of California Idaho would join 10 other restricted states because of transgender rights issues. So all of those stories you can read in full detail at idahonews6.com or at idahoednews.org. Get all my web addresses right for all of you. Those are some of the hot button issues still going on in education, but let's face it, Kevin, for parents, for those of us boots on the ground, those of us following education, teachers themselves. Everybody wants to know what's happening in the fall, and I wanted to bring in a couple of other people who've been talking with us here. Mary is saying that she's actually a school bus driver for Ada West, and I don't know if that means West Ada or Ada West County, she said, but they're telling us we will be returning to work on August 25th. With the new cases of COVID-19 rising in Ada County, I'm sure she's wondering if that's still going to happen. And school districts are going to have to prepare for numerous plans. In fact, in West Ada, we talked even last week how they have this color-coded system where it's almost like a stoplight where there's green and then there's yellow and then there's red. And I know that you probably don't have the answer to this, but a lot of people wondering, okay, well, when do you move from green to yellow? And exactly, is there a phase for that? Because we have this whole new language around COVID-19 when it comes to education.
And it's not just education. Yesterday, Central District Health talking about moving Ada County from phase 4 back to phase 3. Officials were very cautious about not trying to put out a date about, well, when could Ada County move back to phase 4? They talked instead about what they want to see. They want to see a drop in new cases, and they want to see it a significant drop and a sustained drop, not just a one-off one day, hey, numbers are down, we're good to go. They want to see a trend that indicates that this outbreak is slowing down. So, again, I think what Central District Health did on Monday, I think, is illustrative of a lot of what we're going to see as this unfolds and as we get back to school. So, what you're seeing in June, not really affecting day-to-day school operations. It gives you a good indication of what we might see unfold when school reopens, as this pandemic continues. If there's a second wave, if there's a wave that's worsened by outbreaks of flu going on at the same time, how do all of these things play out? And what health districts come up with, what sort of policies and what sort of directives come from the health districts, and then how do schools react to that? Because a really important thing to remember in all of this is that the school reopening plans, health districts do not have to sign off on those under the new plan that's coming out from the state. In the spring, the health districts were basically given veto power. They were given the opportunity to say, well, we don't think that this is a good idea to reopen. Right now, as it stands, school districts, charter schools will make that decision on their own. Health districts do not have to sign off on a reopening plan. So, we talk about local control. The control will really fall to school administrators, school trustees, elected officials who have to make those decisions.
And here's that point in spades with Rachel saying ours, meaning our kids, going to Victory Charter in Canyon County, and they plan on going back as normal as possible. We've had these questions before too, Kevin, where will charter schools have a better shot at reopening? And it is local control and all about the numbers and where the numbers stand in terms of the coronavirus outbreak.
Right, and it may be less about charter schools versus public schools, traditional schools, as opposed to the size of the schools. Smaller schools, with smaller class sizes, in smaller communities might have a little bit better opportunity to open and maintain social distancing and maintain, smaller group sizes. So that may be a big, and here we have a question about class size.
And in a portable, and that's. How do you socially distance kids in a portable? Kevin, I hear you. Teacher, their daughter teaching 28 students in a small portable, classrooms that are already overcrowded. How do CDC guidelines, how are those going to be followed?
I'm going to hazard a guess that it is impossible to space 28 kids in a portable and meet any kind of 6-foot guidelines in terms of social distancing. I can't imagine how you would do that.
Jan bringing this to us. I'm a teacher and I trust my district will make the right decision for me and my students. I would be curious to know if educators feel this way. And again, it's going to be district by district. At least we've reported in both Boise and West Ada, they have done significant surveys of their own employees because they are putting, as I am sure most districts are, the importance of health of their own employees in the same vein as the health of their students. Nobody wants to have coronavirus or a spread. We get that. But I would be curious to know how people are feeling about going back to work and whether or not people agree with Jan, whether or not they trust the district leaders to make the right decisions for the adults as well.
It's going to be very important for us to watch what happens with student enrollment, but also with staff turnover. Again, our staffers, our teachers, our bus drivers, our cafeteria staff, comfortable and confident in returning to the workplace. In addition to our parents and guardians comfortable about sending their kids back.
It is the debate that will rage all summer. And we can all only hope that if we do our part, maybe, hopefully, we will have children back in schools this fall, at least in some form or fashion, because it's what the governor has wanted from the top down. And as a parent, I can clearly tell you it is what I would prefer.
And surveys indicate that as well, that parents, their preference is to get back to something resembling normal. But, can you get back to something resembling normal and do it safely? That's the big question. And that's the one that's impossible to answer at this point. And it's, it's going to be debated by school administrators, by trustees, but it's also going to be decided household by household, parent by parent.
Well, one decision we can make here on Making the Grade every week is to make sure we have a check-in of Kevin's socks.
Okay, we'll do that.
Why, you ask, if you're just joining us on Making the Grade and you haven't been around for weeks and weeks as we've done this, it's because it's a little bit of humor at the end of segments that have been difficult, to say the least, when it comes to education. So, Kevin, show us your socks, my friend.
Okay, so these really have no particular...
There's no meaning?
There's no real story to them.
Are they Star Wars?
No, they are not Star Wars. They are. This is a work of art going back to the late 1800s. Georges Seurat. It's called. It's a circus motif. So you've got some audience there towards the bottom, but you have the actual circus performers. That's what you're looking at. So it's a large public gathering, and we would hope that, we hope we get back to large public gatherings. And since I've shown off my socks, I'm going to also take the liberty of showing this off.
Lovely.
Too, because, this is where I go with, I don't leave home without these. And, we don't know what the future holds, but, the health experts are saying,
wear a mask.
Wear a mask. Err on the side of being careful, not just for yourself, but for those around you. So, socks are fun, socks are nice, but masks feel like, an essential right now. And you can get them a lot of different colors and designs. You can have fun with masks as well. I have a couple on order that I'm looking forward to getting.
Oh, very good. Well, we'll start a new mask episode at the end of Making the Grade instead of socks, or we can see.
We'll never get around to talking about education. We'll be talking about, masks and socks, but that's okay too.
Well, my friend, it is good to see you, even if we are totally social distance from many miles away from each other. I pray that you keep yourself safe, and thank you for being here for Making the Grade. Once again, everybody, if you'd like to read about all of these stories in depth, certainly follow Kevin on social media, but also idahoednews.org. Take care, my friend.
You too. Stay safe.